Welcome to the Clarendon Horatio Daily World Brief, available at clarendonhoratio.com. It is Monday, August 10th, 2026. Imagine your local city government signing a binding contract today just to pay for the military occupation of your own streets tomorrow.
It sounds dystopian, but that is the unprecedented reality hidden inside a new $300 million policing grant being rolled out by the United States Department of Justice.
And it comes with financial strings that could fundamentally alter how your local taxes are spent. We're talking about the Model Cities Policing Initiative, funded by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
The DOJ is preparing to fix up to 4 finalist municipalities, specifically cities with populations over 100,000, to split this $300 million windfall over a 3-year period. On paper, city governments are instructed to use the money to hire more police, fund substance abuse programs, build new facilities.
But getting in the room for this cash requires municipal leaders to preemptively agree to a highly specific, fundamentally ideological set of federal mandates. They have to surrender local autonomy on several major flashpoints.
They do. They must agree to comply completely with federal immigration enforcement requests. They are also required to enact strict local prohibitions on open illicit drug use, urban camping, loitering, and squatting.
Which explicitly repudiates the housing-first model for homelessness. A city cannot just provide shelter anymore under this grant. They are federally mandated to require compliance with treatment programs before an individual can retain housing. But the mechanism that really stands out is the repayment clause.
That clause introduces a completely novel financial tripwire into the relationship between the federal government and local municipalities. By signing this grant, local taxpayers are being forced to underwrite the cost of unspecified future federal interventions.
So a city must preemptively agree to reimburse the Department of Justice for any federal law enforcement intervention if there is a surge in violent crime or public disorder.
That could easily include the deployment of National Guard troops onto city streets during a protest, with the bill sent directly to the mayor's office. Furthermore, the selection process itself has been quietly but radically altered.
The DOJ is bypassing the traditional peer review process entirely here.
Completely. Since 1994, the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services has disbursed over $20 billion using a strict, politically neutral peer review process. The Model Cities Initiative rips that up. The evaluation and selection of these grants have been placed directly in the hands of senior political appointees within the Justice Department.
And the DOJ is explicitly pointing to Washington, D.C. and Memphis, Tennessee as the models to emulate here, specifically highlighting the presence of National Guard troops patrolling those streets. Holding up Memphis as a public safety template is incredibly grim when you look at the human cost on the ground.
The administration has repeatedly defied calls to suspend its controversial task force in Memphis,
A unit involved in 4 officer-involved deaths just since its launch last September. Selling a program with a literal body count as the gold standard for your neighborhood is a profound ideological choice.
It functions as a massive financial wedge. Large municipalities, the vast majority of which are governed by Democratic majorities, are currently facing severe budget constraints and pension shortfalls. This initiative leverages that municipal desperation. It acts as a financial enticement to force local progressive governments to adopt conservative policies and accept federal security interventions, or risk losing out on millions in vital civic funding.
We are seeing domestic security mandates bend heavily to political pressure here in the U.S., but that shifting map of what is considered acceptable force provides a stark contrast to how the rules of engagement are changing overseas. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is seeing a massive evolution in military tactics.
Kyiv is executing a significant shift in its military strategy. A deadly Ukrainian drone strike recently hit deep inside Russian territory, targeting the Tenevo oil refinery in the city of Nizhnekamsk, which is located in the Republic of Tatarstan.
Local officials confirmed that at least 13 people were killed in the strike, and another 75 were injured. The fatalities included 1 child as well as 7 citizens of Uzbekistan.
According to Russian state media and investigative committees, most of the victims were civilians, essentially migrant workers, staying in a hostel near the industrial site when the attack occurred during the night and into the early morning.
To really grasp the geographical scale of this operation, Nizhnekamsk is more than 1,100 kilometers away from the Ukrainian border. That is roughly the distance from Washington, D.C. to Chicago. How does a drone navigate for hours across that much hostile airspace?
Especially when Russia claims to have shot down 450 other Ukrainian drones across the country in that same single night. It reveals a massive blind spot in Russia's internal security. Their radar nets and air defenses cannot cover the interior, meaning distant industrial and economic hubs are now effectively on the front lines of this war.
So is that geographical reach the primary reason Ukraine is doing this?
It is exactly why. Kiev is openly moving away from purely frontline military engagements, where they face deeply entrenched Russian artillery, and pivoting to systematically dismantling the facilities that supply revenue and logistics to Russia's war machine. But the mechanism of this strategy brings severe moral and civic stakes.
We are witnessing the intentional normalization of mounting civilian casualties on Russian soil.
The messaging from Kiev is stark and uncompromising. The head of Ukraine's Center for Countering Disinformation stated publicly that every civilian death in Russia is ultimately the fault of Vladimir Putin for initiating the aggression in 2022.
It is a highly calculated psychological operation designed to force the Russian public to direct their grief and anger at their own leadership, explicitly tying their physical safety in places like Tatarstan to Putin's political decisions in Moscow.
And political calculations dictating the boundaries of war is a dynamic carrying over to the Middle East, where upcoming elections are profoundly shaping the response to a high-stakes peace roadmap for Gaza.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has formally and categorically rejected U.S. President Donald Trump's 15-point Gaza peace plan. This framework, orchestrated by the newly formed Board of Peace, represents months of incredibly delicate negotiations.
The core mechanism of the plan entails the deployment of an international stabilization force, the ISF, to the southern city of Rafah. There, they would work alongside a newly formed Palestinian police force.
In exchange for this stabilization effort, the plan mandates that Hamas and other armed groups completely decommission their weapons, storing them under the strict supervision of a new Palestinian administration that reports directly to the Board of Peace.
Netanyahu informed his cabinet that Israel will not carry out any withdrawal until there is genuine, not fictitious disarmament, demanding the complete surrender of all heavy and light weaponry.
Wait, if Trump needs a foreign policy win before the U.S. midterms, and Netanyahu needs a stall ahead of his own elections, it sounds like this highly complex verification protocol is just a polite way of building a geopolitical waiting room. Is anyone actually disarming? Or is this just political theater while the people of Gaza wait for relief?
You are hitting on the exact diplomatic reality of the situation. The White House is reportedly completely unbothered by Netanyahu's public dismissal of the 15-point document. U.S. officials view the prime minister's stance as necessary domestic campaign rhetoric.
Netanyahu is fighting for his political survival in the first general election since the attacks of October 7, 2023, an election set for October 27, 2026.
He has failed to secure the absolute victory he promised his right-wing coalition partners, who have labeled this Board of Peace deal unacceptable. So the public rejection serves his immediate domestic needs.
But the human impact of this political standoff is devastating. The construction of the first ISF base in Rafah was scheduled to begin at the end of this month. That base is the logistical prerequisite for the desperately needed reconstruction of the territory to commence.
Instead, millions of displaced Gazans are left waiting in the ruins. The Board of Peace is attempting to build this framework strictly on verification protocols, not on trust, with the High Commissioner for Gaza stressing a step-by-step approach to disarmament.
But as Netanyahu navigates his October election, President Trump is facing his own intense political pressures, with the U.S. midterm elections approaching this November.
The Republican Party is facing potential losses driven in part by inflation and the unpopularity of the ongoing U.S. military involvement in Iran. Trump urgently needs a tangible foreign policy victory, meaning the pressure on Israel to eventually accept a version of this framework once the Israeli elections are over will only intensify as November draws closer.
We are seeing political gridlock stall reconstruction in Gaza, but in Europe and Asia. It is not politics destroying infrastructure, it is the atmosphere. We have three deeply alarming climate data points that show physical borders and supply chains literally being washed away or dried up. First, data from the EU's Copernicus Climate Change Service reveals that July 2026 was the joint second warmest month globally on record.
More concerning is that global ocean temperatures outside the polar regions hit an absolute record high of 20.96 degrees Celsius, driven by a massive El Niño system layered over trapped greenhouse gases. The consequences of that atmospheric heat are manifesting in extreme, localized devastation.
Over the weekend, Typhoon Dolphin slammed into eastern China, dumping historic rainfall on the financial hub of Shanghai. One weather station recorded 313 millimeters of rain in just 24 hours.
To put that into perspective, that is the highest single-day rainfall in over 150 years of record-keeping for the city. The sheer volume of water overwhelmed the drainage infrastructure, forcing the emergency evacuation of more than 1 million people across the region. It shut down airports, suspended public transit, and turned major urban landmarks into impassable flood zones.
And while China deals with catastrophic flooding, Europe is facing the exact opposite extreme. Germany's Rhine River, one of the most vital arteries for European industry, has dropped to critically low levels following the hottest June and July on record for Western Europe.
At the Cobb gauge, which is a notoriously shallow choke point between Mainz and Koblenz, the water level fell to just 16 centimeters.
For more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarinhoratio.com. Now look at the logistics of this river crisis. If the Rhine becomes impassable at Cobb, it effectively splits Germany in two for commercial traffic.
When water levels drop this low, the draft of a fully loaded river barge simply hits the riverbed. Shipping companies are already cutting their cargo loads down to 1/5 of normal capacity just to float over the shallows.
The physical math of replacing those barges is impossible. Germany relies on its inland waterways to transport essential bulk materials like iron ore, coal, and petroleum. If the barges have to stop entirely, companies must move that cargo to trucks.
But one single large river barge carries the equivalent of 50 to 150 truckloads. The German road and rail networks physically cannot handle thousands of extra heavy-duty trucks suddenly entering the system. It creates an instant, unyielding bottleneck.
This is an active rolling infrastructure collapse.
The German Economic Institute projects that this drought on the Rhine alone will cause a 0.4% drop in the nation's gross domestic product. Given that Germany's economy has been stagnant for 2 years, this single environmental bottleneck effectively wipes out the country's entire projected economic growth for 2026.
Heavy industries operate on tight margins and rely on cheap, bulk transport. When you remove the river, you spike the cost of basic materials, which ripples out as supply chain inflation across all of Europe.
That tension between infrastructure demands and a fragile environment brings us directly to the U.S. Gulf Coast, where we are actively waiving the rules to build more heavy industry in a vanishing ecosystem.
A pending deal is close to being finalized that would hand Elon Musk's aerospace company, SpaceX, control over 130,000 acres of coastal Vermilion Parish in Louisiana.
The plan centers on an 18-mile strip of Pecan Island, which SpaceX intends to use for launching its massive Starship rockets and deploying a proposed constellation of space-based artificial intelligence data centers.
The land in question has a highly complicated history. It was previously surrendered via a legal settlement with ExxonMobil, following allegations that the oil giant's dredging and canal building activities severely worsened pollution and land loss in the area.
Now, facilitated by the Republican state leadership in Louisiana, it is poised to become a private spaceport spanning an area several times larger than Washington, D.C.
Handing over this particular wetland to SpaceX is like giving a pyromaniac the keys to a paper mill. You are introducing high-octane explosive forces into an ecosystem that is already structurally disintegrating. Pecan Island is part of a fraying coastline that is vanishing into the Gulf of Mexico at a terrifying rate.
We are talking about losing roughly 1 football field of land every 100 minutes due to rising sea levels and subsidence.
Beyond the human residents, this specific stretch of wetlands is a crucial stopover for hundreds of millions of migrating birds. 40% of all North American waterfowl rely on this habitat as they navigate the Mississippi Flyway. Building massive industrial infrastructure here is sparking intense local backlash.
The mechanism enabling this project highlights a profound civic issue: the systematic waiving of foundational environmental protections to accommodate private space ventures. To clear the path for this megaproject, federal and state governments are moving to bypass standard requirements under the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act.
Normally, if a developer destroys wetlands, they are legally mandated to mitigate that damage elsewhere. Waiving these laws fundamentally alters the cost of doing business.
It socializes the environmental loss while privatizing the space gains. It highlights a stark civic imbalance. Elon Musk, the world's richest individual who recently orchestrated an unelected reorganization of the federal government at President Trump's behest, is able to leverage immense political influence to bypass local accountability and environmental guardrails that would strictly govern any ordinary infrastructure project.
Billionaires bypassing standard rules leads perfectly into our final story today. A United States federal judge in Brooklyn, Nicholas Carafas, has officially dismissed criminal fraud and bribery charges against the Indian billionaire Gautam Adani.
The circumstances surrounding this dismissal are highly unusual and legally fraught. Adani was originally indicted for allegedly bribing Indian government officials to secure contracts for a massive solar energy plant, and then systematically misleading U.S. investors about his company's anti-corruption practices.
Building a white-collar prosecution of this magnitude usually takes years. It involves tracing international wire transfers, securing cooperating witnesses, and compiling thousands of pages of financial forensics.
Yet the U.S. Justice Department abruptly abandoned the case, filing a notice stating the prosecution was primarily foreign, hard to prove, and, quote, inconsistent with the agency's current priorities.
How does a massive federal anti-corruption case just vanish overnight? The timeline is what makes this so jarring. The Justice Department moved to drop these charges shortly after Adani publicly promised to invest $10 billion into the United States economy.
Judge Garofis was clearly skeptical of the DOJ's sudden reversal. He called their justification bland and conclusory. He then took the extraordinary step of demanding a sworn declaration directly from Adani on July 15th.
Forcing the billionaire to state under oath that the $10 billion pledge was not an explicit quid pro quo to dropping the federal indictment.
A federal judge demanding a sworn declaration to deny a quid pro quo is a massive anomaly. Submitting a false declaration carries severe perjury risks, meaning the judge essentially forced Adani to put his freedom on the line in writing because the court fundamentally did not trust the Justice Department's paperwork.
Adani and his legal team did submit the declaration denying any formal agreement. However, his lawyers openly acknowledged, telling the DOJ during negotiations, that the massive investment pledge might be part of a resolution.
The optics are undeniable. The Department of Justice dropped a massive anti-corruption prosecution involving a foreign billionaire almost immediately after a massive financial pledge to the United States.
This case serves as a vital stress test for the integrity of the U.S. justice system during Donald Trump's second term. While formal agreements are denied on paper, the sequence of events raises urgent questions about whether federal justice is being influenced by transactional politics and immense wealth.
Today's stories show several distinct pressures moving in different directions, from the battlefield in Tatarstan to the dried-out bed of the Rhine River and a federal courtroom in Brooklyn. But a recurring, undeniable pattern is visible across all of them.
The foundational rules and guardrails of our society, whether those are local policing standards, international borders, bedrock environmental protections, or the blind scales of the justice system, are actively bending under the weight of immense wealth and consolidated political pressure.
The mechanisms designed to regulate power are being bypassed, defunded, or rewritten by the powerful themselves.
If the stability of our civic life relies on laws that can be waived for billionaires, rewritten by political appointees, or ignored in the pursuit of foreign policy wins, who actually benefits from this system that is being built in their place? Thank you for listening. For slower context and deeper analysis, check out our debate candy explanations and visit clarineratio.com for more daily world briefs.